Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Bill Miller from Clear Growth Capital. I'm one of the volunteers of roughly 70 who have been working hard to advise Arizona companies on how to grow to the next level. Welcome to the Arizona Business Council, founded about a year and a half ago by a lady I'm going to introduce in a moment. What we're going to do today is give you a quick a lot of lessons, and hopefully you'll be taking a lot of notes. We've got two wonderful keynote speakers. We'll be starting with Craig, followed by a great panel that's put a lot of thought into giving you tips on how to raise capital, and finishing up with Benson from Able Engineering, who will also tell you an awful lot about what they've learned there as they started growing. The Arizona Business Council was formed about a year and a half ago as a result of a bunch of business people sitting around our board table, and they were saying a lot of companies here in Arizona are doing $3 and $5 million, but they're about to run out of capital and they don't know it. And I said, I see a lot of companies too that are struggling, can't seem to get up to the high enough level to be interest private equity, or they can't qualify for bank money. About 2 months later, Sally Marinoff called me and said, I'm hearing a lot of Arizona companies here need help in growing to the later stages. And I said, bingo. So that was the foundation for the Arizona Business Council starting. We've got a Catalyst program. It's really a panel process that helps a lot of business owners. We had several go through last year. Hopefully you picked up the flyer. The panel works very hard to give a lot of wonderful, we call it suggestions, Mr. Attorney, not legal advice, about how to get your financials in better shape, your intellectual property, your management team, and all the other key indicators that's required. I'd like to have Sally Marinoff, our founder, and last year's president, say just a couple of words. Come on over.
I have a lot of facial expressions. You'll see that. Well, I want to welcome you and thank you for coming to this seminar. Giving free educational seminars to the public has been a goal of the Arizona Business Council since its inception. The other purpose that ABC has is to assess your company for its strengths and weaknesses and help to guide you to your next level, however it is that you define what your next level is. We are able to do this because professionals, all experts in their fields, willingly and voluntarily come together to build our business community resources and show Arizona that we have all the sophistication locally you need to grow your business into a robust, highly valuable entity. You don't have to go back east, you don't have to go to California, we got it all here. These professionals are lawyers, accountants, traditional and alternative financing entities, and experienced business experts who've helped companies grow. There is no other offering of services where you will receive comments from 8 professionals all at once. The cost of an assessment and entry into our Business Catalyst program is relatively small and covers both the ability to put the panel presentation together for you, like we have done today, and also to be able to put on seminars such as this for the community. The professionals offer their time for free. In this way, Arizona Business Council is a sustainable entity that will continue to be able to offer you the very best in knowledge, experience, and support to get you where you want to go. So sit back, take lots of notes, and ask your questions at the end of each session. This is quite a meaty, content-intensive seminar that should prove exciting and motivational. We have 2 fantastic speakers who've had quite the interesting experiences that all of you are going to benefit from hearing from. So if you don't get all your questions answered by the time it ends, stick around and network and ask at that time. We are here to help you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Sally.
I too have a lot of clients who they get startup money, and this is a great community for raising that capital, but then taking that next step of getting the capital after that. We don't have the private equity money or funding for that, and so it's nice to be in a community and a group that is now committed to see that process happen. Our first speaker, Craig Weiss, actually I met Craig through a cold call. he called me out of the blue and wanted to get together for lunch, and I had visions of grandeur. I thought, just like my federal civil procedure professor in law school, that Craig was hiring me not to do anything, but to be paid to do nothing. But my dreams were shattered when we had lunch, because he was actually interested in me doing some work, and he was at the time a patent attorney full time, and he was talking about the possibility of taking over the reign of NJoy. And so my next thought was, well, as a patent attorney, if he doesn't make it, at least there'll be good fees for me, because attorneys know that attorneys need to be paid, unlike some other people. And you know, as a patent attorney, he of all people appreciates the detail. But again, I was disappointed, because he did a phenomenal job, and they did what they said they were going to do. And he, after many months of putting the strategy together, they did take over NJoy. And Craig had a philosophy of hire the best and the brightest and listen to them. That's a novel concept often in Arizona. And he used that and proceeded to raise quite a bit of money after that. So with no further ado, please welcome Craig Weiss.
All right, I think they've hooked me up, so I'm good. Okay. All right, I don't know if people can hear me or not. I'll try this. Thanks, Steve, for the introduction. Steve, by the way, is one of those few people that I say has a PhD in common sense. So he's been a wonderful advisor and friend for these last few years, and I wouldn't have been in a position to take over NJoy without a lot of his counsel. So I wanted to do something a little different today. You know, I've spoken in the past about NJoy, and what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about raising money from the perspective of the pitch. So you know, you make a pitch, and you're talking to potential investors, and so how do you make that pitch? How do you get them? How do you entice excitement in the mind of the investor to want to invest in what it is that you're doing? And so I thought I would do it in kind of two different stories. So one is the NJoy story, which some of you know quite a bit about, or somewhat about, and I'm going to kind of give you the NJoy pitch as I used to give it. And then I've got a new business that I'm working on now, which, you know, NJoy's kind of was a big sort of complete story, and the new business is at the very, very beginning. And so you'll kind of see really both perspectives, a much more mature story and a story that's much more in its infancy, and you can see kind of how I go about raising money in terms of how I think about it. So, you know, I'll see if this thing, there we go. So I think of raising money as being a storyteller, in the sense that you've got to be able to cogently tell your story. What is it that your story has that nobody else has, that is going to get people interested? And so, you know, the thing that I think is a helpful way to think about how do you tell your story is when you start with why. So Simon Sinek, some of you have heard of, is a tremendous author, and he basically has this concept of most people don't really know why they do what they do. They know what they do. That's the sort of outer circle, and they often know how they do what they do, but they rarely know why they do what they do. And his whole concept is start with the why. Why do you know, what is it that you're doing? And so it's hard to attach a greater purpose to what it is that you're doing. And I found personally, what gets me excited, and what I think gets investors excited, is if they can realize that they're part of some greater purpose. I see if it works from a technical perspective, but I wanted to show a little 45-second video. I don't know how many of you watched the HBO TV show Silicon Valley, but it's a fabulous comedy, and it sort of pokes fun at so much of what goes on in the investment world. And I thought for 45 seconds it'd be a little comic relief to show how they go with this idea of starting with why.
Will revolutionize location-based mobile news aggregation as you know it.
We're making the world a better place through Paxos algorithms for consensus protocols.
And we're making the world a better place through software-defined data centers for cloud computing.
A better place through canonical data models to communicate between endpoints.
A better place through scalable, fault-tolerant distributed databases with ACID transactions.
And we are truly local, mobile, social.
And we're completely so-mo-low.
And we're Molo-so.
We're low-mo-so, bro.
We were so-low-mo, but now we're mo-low-so. No, mo-so-low. No.
So that's one way to handle it. I tried the mission to obsolete cigarettes, but I loved how they sort of poked fun at this idea of starting with why and how you're trying to make the world a better place through, then you fill in the blank with a lot of technical jargon. But this was our big message at NJoy. So our mission is to obsolete cigarettes. That was the why. So we started with why. And it was our big, bold, audacious goal. We chose our words carefully. Obsolete connotes technology. We thought of ourselves as a technology company, and we were going to use technology to obsolete this very archaic thing. We basically took this idea that, hey, there's been all these advancements in technology with the automobile, with books, with telephones, and yet cigarettes had remained the same for basically 100 years. Machine cigarettes were invented right before World War I. And really in the span of 100 years, you had the only real innovation was they put a filter on it in the 1950s. That was it. In the flip-top box, I guess you could call that a packaging innovation that happened also, I think, in the 1950s. So this idea that, okay, we're doing something that's from a technical perspective, this is an industry that was in need of some innovation. So we said, okay, hey, here's the story. You've got smokers, almost 20% of the adults in the United States. You've got all of these people all over the world between the European Union, 120 million. They're currently not being satisfied by the alternatives that are out there today, whether it's chewing gum or the gums or the patches. And so they're spending quite a bit of money. You've got globally $800 billion being spent by 1.3 billion smokers on tobacco products every single year. And yet you've got 69% of them who say that they want to quit. So one of our big sort of pitches was, there's no other product in the world that 7 out of 10 people, when they buy it, say, gosh, I wish I wasn't buying this. And so they don't want cancer, but they do crave the nicotine. If we can give them the nicotine that they crave in a familiar way that they get it, then we can give them what they want without the things that they don't want. And then, if you notice, at the end of this is the how, which is to me the least interesting part of the pitch of our story. Some people would ask, and obviously we would talk about it, okay, well, there's this electronic nicotine delivery device, and there's a power source, this battery, and we have vaporization of this liquid, and the liquid contains nicotine and flavorings and a carrier agent. But this is not very exciting stuff, and this isn't what would get an investor excited about purchasing. You have to tell some of the story of what you do, but it gets back to, again, if you start with why, I think that's a really interesting way to go. So this was a little bit of the NJoy story. I'm going to switch to what I'm working on now. Okay, Aladdin. So what's our mission, right? To make your dreams what you want them to be. And there's a lot of ways for me to describe what it is that we're attempting to do here. But I'll sort of talk about it in this way. This is one way to talk about it. So how much would you pay for an extra year of life? How valuable would that be to you? So I would say, what about, 5 more years? And so now you might be thinking, well, it depends, if I've got Alzheimer's, if I'm at the end of my life, maybe I don't, want 5 years. So what if I said you could get those 5 years while you were in the best shape of your life? And then you're thinking, okay, well, that seems like it'd be pretty valuable. So then you'd say, what if I could use that time to, fulfill your every fantasy? So, if you have 5 years to just work in the mines, maybe that's not so exciting, but if you could use it to do that. And so, as opposed to waiting until you're retired or until you're, at the end of your life, what if you could actually start today? So that was sort of how I framed the Aladdin proposition in terms of the value proposition. So where does this all come from? How is it that I'm making this, these outlandish offers to people? So people dream for about 2 hours a night, a little less than 2 hours a night. So if you add that up, it's about 20 years in your lifetime, about 5 of which are, 20 years of sleep, about 5 of which, or 5 of those years are spent dreaming. So, for most of us, dreams are basically just a random set of things that happen that one minute you're being chased by a lion, and the next minute you're sitting at your desk stressing out about some presentation, or you're back in a classroom unprepared for an exam. But there's a small percentage of human beings on this planet who have what are called lucid dreams. And so what are lucid dreams? So the classic definition is these are dreams that you have where you're aware that you're dreaming. So just for fun, I'll ask the question, how many of you in the room, show of hands, have had a dream in your life in which during the dream you knew this is a dream, this isn't real? Okay, a little more than half. So what's interesting is the people who are, I'll call them expert lucid dreamers, they have this experience every night, not just occasionally. And once they realize they're dreaming, they can take control over their dream because they know it's just a creation of their own imagination. They don't have to stay in that situation that they're in. They can fly like Superman. They can, have sex with someone who isn't their spouse. They can, jet ski on Mars. There's lots of things that they can do. There's no physics. There's no morality. And they have this experience on a nightly basis. And so this has actually been going on for thousands of years. There used to be monks who used to train to do this. But there's now some really interesting science. And the science is that there was an article published in Nature, the preeminent peer-reviewed scientific journal, in which 6 neuroscientists figured out that if you looked at lucid dreamers, expert lucid dreamers, they had brain activity in a certain area of their brain at a certain frequency, which for the rest of us is a dormant area of the brain while we sleep. And it's the area of the brain that controls reasoning. So when we're awake, we have reasoning, or at least most of us do, hopefully. But when we dream, for most of us, we don't have reasoning. So weird, crazy stuff happens, and you just go with it, because you don't have reasoning to say, well, what am I doing back in 5th grade? But for these lucid dreamers, they have reasoning. So they say, what am I doing back in 5th grade? Oh, it's because it's a dream. Well, gosh, I don't need to stay in 5th grade. I can go do whatever I want to do. And what's more is you can not just live out fantasies, you can do some other things that are very interesting. You can actually practice waking activities, whether that's public speaking, playing tennis, shooting free throws, playing the guitar, and it will improve your waking performance of those activities. So you can use your time productively. If you believe in the Malcolm Gladwell theory that it takes 10,000 hours to be a world expert in something, that's 3 hours a day for 10 years. You could do 2 of those every night while you're asleep. So, what did I do? Of course, I had to put together the dream team. It was too easy a term not to use. But I went out and I've got, a board-certified neurosurgeon, MD, PhD from Yale, who's the head of neurology at Harvard's Training Hospital, 2 PhDs who run sleep centers, electrical engineer who was the former chief scientist at a sleep hardware company, to work on this endeavor. And so that, for just sort of in a nutshell, that's my Aladdin pitch, which is a very different pitch than the NJoy pitch, but I think you can see in both cases, starting with why, right? Why am I doing this? Well, I want to, create a world without nightmares, or there's lots of things you could say about it. And one of the pieces of advice that I had gotten when I, starting on this fundraising journey from a mentor of mine was, it really comes down to this sort of proposition that investors are really only interested in one thing, and that one thing is growth. And I actually see this axiom of truth every single day. In fact, I don't know, for those of you who are following it, you see how Apple stock just has been getting crushed over these last few weeks or months. Well, they're the most valuable company in the world. They have more cash on hand than any company in the history of the world's ever had. They're selling products at this incredible pace. Everyone wants them. But the reason why their stock is getting killed is because investors are concerned about growth, that they're not going to continue to grow at the pace that they've been growing at in the past. So here, they have financial metrics that any company in the world would dream for, the EBITDA, the amount of profits they're able to generate and the revenue that they're able to generate, yet investors care about growth. And so when they're concerned there isn't as much growth in Apple's future as there has been in the past, they cut and run and sell their stock. So it's something that I think is a really important thing to kind of keep in mind. This is very absolutely true. So I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that said no to me along the way with NJoy. We raised, I guess I raised almost $200 million, a little more than $200 million in a 3-year period of time. And I would say that was really like a less than 5% success rate in terms of the people that said yes versus the people who said no. It might have been closer to 2%. And so you have to just accept the fact that most people aren't going to either understand what you're doing, or they're not going to believe in you, or they're not going to believe in your company, or they're not going to believe in what you're doing. And so you have to obviously at the end of the day believe in yourself, because otherwise it gets really discouraging. I was telling my wife the other day, being an entrepreneur is sort of like being bipolar. 1 minute you're at the peak and you're going to take on the world. The next minute, you just don't think you can do it anymore. So you've got to just get comfortable with rejection. One of the practical pieces of advice that I would give is trying to become an expert in your field, whatever that field is. So I did interviews. I spoke to financial analysts in Wall Street. I spoke at conferences. Speaking to people and trying to put yourself in a position, offering to give them information about an industry that they care about. For example, I went to the tobacco analysts who covered Wall Street, covered the tobacco industry. They wanted to talk to me because they wanted to learn more about this new industry that was impacting the industry that they covered. Eventually, they invited me to attend their conferences. Eventually, they invited me to speak at their conferences. I did interviews with every possible, Reuters, AP, New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal, and all of those places. And so the more it becomes kind of a self-reinforcing sort of Jim Collins flywheel, right? The more you do, the more you become the expert that you set out to be. And then you got to have patience. This is the reality is you want things to work out, and you want them to work out quickly, but they never do. And certainly that was my experience with NJoy, and even with Aladdin. I went to go meet with VCs in Silicon Valley a few weeks ago, and so it's fun for me. I'm on the other end of the spectrum. All the money I raised, the 200 was post-revenue private equity money. Now I'm at pre-revenue VC money. Different people, but I think there's still a tremendous amount of overlap. But I came out of my first two meetings, and I was like, God, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Like I knew I wasn't going to just get a term sheet on the first day, and it's going to have to take a little while. But I will say, at least for me, I felt during this long journey a perverse kind of enthusiasm when people rejected me. For me, it was just I was more motivated by proving them wrong than I was to reward the people who believed in me. It's just a strange thing. I once read Michael Jordan hated to lose more than he liked to win. And I think for whatever reason, that was just sort of the way I was wired. So some of that, I don't mind the rejections, because there was no greater feeling of satisfaction than the people that had the chance to invest and didn't, and then they regretted it later, at least for me. Not probably all that mentally healthy, but anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has about any of that stuff. Yes?
I have a question. How much would you say in the last couple of years you've spent, how much time have you dedicated to raising capital versus the daily task of running your company?
It's a great question. So I would say there was a point with NJoy where it became, I don't want to say my full-time job, but it was certainly taking up well more than 50% of my time, to the detriment of the business, no question. You can't be maniacally focused on fundraising and maniacally focused on your business. Sort of, so it was definitely the business suffered as a result. There's no question about it. And during the periods where we were in, like diligence, and we had a term sheet, and we were trying to get to the close, it really became 100% of my time. There was nothing more important. And people would congratulate me when I got a term sheet. I was like, don't congratulate me. Like, it's not done until the money's in the bank. And to me, getting the money in the bank was, I never took for granted. And so I often felt like just getting them over the finish line was a absolute, full-time effort to do that. So it takes up an enormous amount of time. So I think in a perfect world, you either have a superstar kind of trusted COO to kind of run things while you're doing fundraising, or you have a superstar CFO who's either doing the fundraising or helping you do the fundraising, but you need some support. Otherwise, the business is going to suffer. There's no question. Yes?
How do you determine how much money to raise? I mean, there's a roadmap for a company. If you raise too little, you'll be in the perpetual raising money business, and you got to also run the company. So there's like if you raise a certain amount of money, deliver, or start working back and raise more.
So it's a good question. I mean, I used to think of raising money a little bit on a sliding scale, that it was always tied to valuation. So the higher the valuation, the more you could raise. The lower the valuation, the less you would raise. It's a complicated question to answer. I mean, the simple answer is raise more than you think you need. That's probably the simplest answer, because you always end up needing more than you thought you did. Some people say as a basic rule, whatever you think you actually need in terms of what pencils out, raise 2x that amount. That's not a bad place to start. But you have to be really careful who you take on as investors. And I would say I learned, unfortunately the hard way, what happens when you take on the wrong investors. And not all money is the same, and the sources are different. And when you get that, you've got there's different expectations. There's control issues with respect to the management of the company. It's a complicated thing. So I would say this, if your gut tells you you're not so sure, like, I wouldn't do it. It's who you're with and who you have to sort of get in bed with at the end of the day. I mean, it becomes a huge part of your life. You have to answer to them in so many ways. So you want to really get the right people. Everyone says the right thing, so you just can't take them at face value. You've got to do your own diligence. I talked to the other people that those investors had dealt with. You can go on the internet and find out. Obviously, if there's people suing them, that's not a good sign. Things like that, but I hope that's helpful. Yes?
Craig, with a 2% success rate in the capital raise, how much fear and anxiety did you have with the other 98% that you were giving away the farm, too much intellectual capital? Giving your ideas away to those who might take them and be an aggressive competitor.
So it's interesting. It's a great question. This idea of were you concerned when you're talking to all these other people about giving away too much information? So Steve mentioned I used to be a patent attorney, and so that meant I met with inventors every day, and there's no more paranoid slice of society than inventors. And I used to have meetings with people. They'd come in, they'd make an appointment, they'd sit down across from me, and they'd say, well, I've got this great idea that I wanted to talk about for getting patent protection. I would say, okay, what's your idea? And they'd say, well, I can't tell you. Under this theory that maybe I was going to steal their idea, and so. I used to have some fairly healthy paranoia about that myself, but actually over time, I've come to a completely, almost the opposite conclusion, which is it's hard enough for you to do what you do best, let alone for just some other person who you're just meeting, for them to get up to speed, and of course, they're presumably doing something else full time, so now they've got to abandon that or jettison that. And in fact, I have a person who I respect quite a bit, who took the position, he took it to the ultimate extreme, that you could go to who you fear to be your biggest competitor and tell them what you're working on, and they likely wouldn't do it because they're working on whatever they're working on all day long, and they'd have to devote the resources and the attention and drop their focus on what they think is obviously so interesting and important. So I'm less concerned about that now than I probably once was. And they see how far along you are, and they realize they're going to have to catch up. So that wasn't a concern for me. But you just have to. It's the unfortunate perseverance of having to talk to so many people who some people just don't get it, and then you just realize you're like I had a meeting last week with someone who's an interesting guy, who's a potential investor, and so I asked him the question I asked you guys. Have you ever had a dream in which you knew you were dreaming? And the answer he gave me, I probably get about 50% of the time, which was, yeah, I think so. And I was like, okay, I'm probably in the wrong room, because the answer that I get from the people who've really had it is yes, like they're waiting for my next question. But you were ever able to control that dream? Yes. It was the most amazing thing ever happened. Those are the people who get it and understand. Yeah, I think my time is up, but I'll stick around so if people have any other questions. But thank you very much.
Years ago, I had a client, and they, just like Craig mentioned, were very concerned about losing their confidentiality of their idea. And the fundraiser presented the idea to their biggest competitor that did $16 billion a year in revenue. And I said, well, let's fly out and meet them. And it turned out they were interested in funding my client. So as Craig mentioned, I think more often than not, even we attorneys are more paranoid about that than we should be. Next, let's welcome Fred, who's going to moderate our panel. So Fred, come on up. And Fred does a great job of moderating all sorts of...
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to add my thanks to those earlier for you all being here today. I am Fred Croyne with the company called Goal Partners. We do strategic implementation, which is kind of a new term we've created. But I have the pleasure of been on the Arizona Business Council for the last 18 months, and currently it's co-chair of its General Business Special Interest Group. And we've got a good panel for you here today. I'd like to invite the panelists to come up and take their seats before we begin. I'll have them introduce themselves in a minute, but I thought it would be interesting. I know obviously you're all here because you have an interest in raising capital for one reason or another, or the people who you think would be attending a session on raising capital. So perhaps one segment are the entrepreneurs or business owners who are interested in either funding their existing business or startup business. How many folks would, show of hands, would think that they fall into that category? Entrepreneurs or business owners thinking of raising capital. Okay, about 10 or so. Perhaps you are an investor or represent a company that does financing of businesses. How many of you fall into that category? Hands, please. Also, a slightly fewer number. And last that I could think of was potentially a diverse group of business consultants and those who provide services to the communities of entrepreneurs and investors. How many fall into that category? The largest group. Okay, good. Well, whichever group you're in, frankly, we are confident that the information that our panelists will give you today would be of value to you. And here is again where we slip in the legal disclaimer. So be aware that our panel's comments are offered as general information only and should not be construed as legal, accounting, or professional advice. We have structured the panel to give each of our panelists a topic of interest to them in their area of expertise. I would like to ask you all to, courtesy of holding your questions till the end, the panel will go for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll leave at least 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions. So jot them down, if you will, along the way. Let me start on this end, and they will speak from my immediate left to right. So Ralph, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Ralph Tapscott. I'm President and CEO of Republic Bank AZ, a community bank here in the Valley. I've been in banking 29 years, President and CEO of the bank for about 10. That's about all I know.
TJ?
Sweet. TJ Jennings. I am a recovering investment banker out of Manhattan for years. Focused on syndicated leveraged finance, high yield bonds, leveraged buyouts, M&A, or as my wife calls it, all the financial googly guy. Came out and settled down in Arizona about 8 years ago and did consulting and restructuring for a number of years, helping companies keep their company. And then worked for the state of Arizona for about 4+ years, creating, managing, and running the state's investment funds to help companies gain access to capital. And now I'm currently in the process of closing a new fund. I've gone private no longer with the state, a new fund that will total about $200 million that I'll be running here, focused on running capital to businesses in Arizona and the West Coast.
Rick Lieberman. I'm an attorney with Jennings, Strouss, and Salmon, doing business law, everything from forming young companies on up to representing them through their exit, helping them raise capital along the way. And I've been doing this for a little over 30 years.
Bob Semple, I'm the managing partner of Semple, Marchal, and Cooper. We're a public accounting firm located in the Valley. We've been in practice 35 years, and I was the founding partner, so I've been there that long.
I'm going to lead it off today, and I'm going to really talk about traditional debt financing. So the topic of the seminar is raising capital. The way I look at capital is to the equity side of your balance sheet, but the right-hand side of your balance sheet funds the growth on the left-hand side. So again, traditional bank financing, TJ and Rick are going to talk about true capital, or as I call it, TJ, synthetic capital. Bank loans aren't easy to get, okay? But let me tell you, the Phoenix MSA is about an $80 billion banking market, and banks do want to lend money. I'm going to say today in Phoenix we have somewhere between $5 and $8 billion ready to lend by banks. Unfortunately, last week I read a survey by the American Institute of Banking that said 52% of small to mid-sized business owners are getting what they're asking for. So nearly half are not getting what they want. So why do we have a disconnect? I'm hoping to kind of clear some things up here. Additionally, in last week's Phoenix Business Journal, there's an interesting article on how low we rank on small businesses getting financing. Let's understand the Arizona banking landscape, because it's different than most other major metropolitan areas. Again, with our size, there are roughly 60 institutions operating within this market. However, almost 3/4 of all assets are held by the top 3 banks. You don't see that in any other market. I looked this morning just to verify after reading this article over the weekend. Looked at Los Angeles, looked at Chicago, looked at Atlanta. Their 3 largest banks hold less than 50% market share. So they have a much larger number of banks operating. But I'm here to tell you there's money out there to lend. We just need to get the connection made. So my goal, I run a community bank. We're $90 million in assets. We focus almost exclusively on small businesses and lower mid-market businesses. My goal between now and the end of the year is to push $15 million out the door in your hands to grow your businesses. The thing you guys need to realize is we run a very leveraged business. Our leverage ratio is somewhere around a 10 to 1, and our profit margins are very small. We're lucky to make 1% at the bottom line. So I always say we don't always make the right call, but we can't afford to make the wrong call very often. It takes hundreds of millions of dollars to cover $1 million losses. So that being said, what advice can I give you on how to get financing? So, I find businesses are in operation typically 2 or 3 years before they're really at the borrowing level. They're banking with somebody now, but they haven't established a relationship yet. Establish your relationships with your banker early. Get to know the banker. They need to know you, and they need to know your business before you ever need them. And not all banks and not all bankers are created equal. If you're a business bank, you need somebody who understands business cycles, different industries and the like. So get to know your banker, and it doesn't hurt. Shame on me for saying this. It doesn't hurt to have more than one banker. Have a few of them, just so that they can meet your needs. Secondly, and Bob's going to talk on it, is we are analytically minded. We deal with financial statements. We're trying to predict payment in the future, but we're using historical data to kind of help document that story. I see all too many times folks will come in with not the highest quality financials. Don't focus on those. Enlist the professionals. Get a CPA that works for you. If they don't earn their keep in providing you good advice and quality financials, there are good CPAs out there that will. Next, so when we look at analyzing credit, most all of us look at the 5 C's of credit. Cash flow is the first thing we look at. How am I going to get repaid? And traditionally, we're looking to historical cash flow. When we go to the future, and it's funny, one of our ABC panelists coined the phrase that I've used again and again: everybody makes money in Excel. When we look at projections, in 29 years, I've seen one set of projections that didn't work, and they always coin them with their conservative. And I can tell you more times than not, I see projections not being met. So it's nice when you have a historical run, even if you have some growth, it allows us to believe in the future that much more. So cash flow, capital. Unfortunately, I had to turn down a friend of mine last week. His balance sheets just don't balance left to right. The right-hand side has to balance. My friend had $1.3 million in debt and $100,000 in capital. His leverage ratio was 13. We look at industries. His industry should have been at a 2 times leverage rate. He had no more borrowing capacity. Your banker can help inform you on what's the norm for your industry, but cash flow, capital, character. We're going to talk to your vendors. We're going to talk to your suppliers. We're going to look at your credit history, and we're going to try to make an assertion as to what character is. And a lot of these other things can be corrected, but character flaws are hard to correct. So keep your nose clean. In that, one indication of character is your credit history. If you don't have a good credit score, what can you do over the next several months to lift it by 20 or 40 points to get yourself north of 700? If you are north of 700, stay there and value that. Finally, collateral. In the event something goes wrong, our last effort on being repaid is typically leaning on that collateral. Collateral means something different to you as the owner than it does to me. You're looking at it on a retail markup basis, what you can get. I'm going to take it, what's left of it, on a wholesale basis and figure out how to get some cash out of it. Finally, and Craig touched on it, as he grows businesses exponentially, do you have the competency to run this business for the next 5 years? If I'm doing a 5-year loan to you and you're going to grow your business from $3 million to $17 million, are you the right person to run it, or have you aligned yourself with the right professionals to help complement you and bring it up? So those are hopefully some helpful ideas. There's a saying, money's easier to get when you don't need it. There's a lot of truth to that. So work on it early and be persistent. But to talk about some of the mezz debt and other things, TJ, you want to take over?
Sure. So my expertise is on the alternative financing world. That's what I love. That's what I was born to do. So just by show of hands, who in here has ever gotten denied for a loan for your business? Anybody? Anybody? Okay. Who is really excited about giving up a ton of equity to get money for your business? All right, no hands. Good, good. So there is a happy medium somewhere in there depending on who you are and what you need. And I'm going to talk about a few of those mediums right now. Some of those being venture capital, angel investment, mezzanine financing, hard money factoring, leasing. All of these are terms that if you haven't heard this before, you need to crack a book and figure out what those are and where they mean to you, because they each have their own pluses and minuses. They could be detrimental or extremely helpful to your business, and it's kind of like, you're dating. You have to figure out what's going to work for you. And so in this aspect, think of, we'll start at one end of the spectrum, venture capital. We mentioned a lot of talk about ideals today, and everybody's worried about stealing somebody's ideas. To be honest, nobody really cares that much about your idea. They're not going to steal it. If you do have the ability to execute it, that's all you have is an idea. Until you reach out and get access to capital, that's when you become real. And so venture capital folks are more the ideals folks. They look at that seed capital, that dream, that prayer, this, you could do 1% of $1 trillion market. That's what they want to, that's what they live and die on. And they're hoping that they can invest in you vis-a-vis taking a healthy ownership of your business, greater than 51%. And that they hope that maybe one, or if some miracle, 2 out of 10 of these things take off like a rocket, or it's the next Google or whatnot, or the Alibaba, and they can make a ton of money. Now, more often than not, those are where dreams go to die, and people get really upset about financing and thinking all of us finance people are evil when they take over the company and their idea is gone. So that VC aspect maybe wasn't right for that particular venture. So there's a whole slew of seminars you can have on VC. I won't bore your details on that. We'll move on to angel investors. Love angel investors, but again, and private equity. These groups tend to be a little bit further along that food chain in that they don't necessarily fund ideas per se. There's always exceptions. They tend to look at companies that have, maybe they're trying to get to proof of concept, or a little bit further along, or maybe they've got some cash flow ideally, and that there is a remnants of hope that you can actually make some money so that they can get paid down the road. Now, they also want to take a healthy share of interest potentially in your business, vis-a-vis ownership. So you have to be careful who you get, in with. But there's all, they might be softer than VC folks potentially. And then moving on, you get to my favorite, the mezzanine folks. I'm biased. And so, what is mezzanine financing? Who has heard that phrase before? Anybody? Okay. So, in case you haven't, mezzanine financing, for lack of a more articulate phrase, is simply a hybrid between equity and debt. It usually starts off as debt capital, and then it has the ability to convert to equity ownership if you don't pay me back or pay somebody back. And so mezzanine folks really, they often, there's always exceptions, aren't necessarily looking to take ownership in your business or want to run it. They just want a healthy return. And that's where that return starts off in that 12% and up interest range. And so these types of debt instruments tend to be subordinated. Simply put, if things go south, somebody else is getting paid first and they're playing second fiddle. And because of that, they also have the ability to be very quick, a little faster. Most traditional bank underwriting might take anywhere from 30 days to who knows how long, depending on the business. Mezzanine folks can work, let's just say, exponentially faster because they have a different set of rules, a different set of guidelines. And for that expediency, as a business, you're going to pay a price. That would be the interest rate. And so again, that can fit what your business needs for a period of time, because ideally, once you pay that money off, they're gone. It's not like taking an equity partner. It's kind of like getting married. It's pretty expensive to have a domestic reorg. Don't go down that route if you don't have to. All right, so next, hard money. Think of this, everyone knows what harmony is. People think of somebody coming by and kneecapping you if you don't pay them back. It doesn't have to be that exact, that extreme. There are reasonably soft, kind, friendly, hard money folks. It's just a higher price. And they tend to do a little bit less due diligence sometimes. It depends on the business and what they're comfortable with doing. Two more, factoring. Think of factoring as simply bridging a timing gap in that you provide a good or service to somebody and you've got terms. They're going to pay you back in 30 days, 45 days, 90 days. Well, that sounds great. You have a contract, but you still have a business to pay for. You have payroll flowing every 2 weeks or however you're paying it. And so you might not be able to afford the time it takes to get paid. Or if some vendor is having a hard time and they stretch you and they say, you know what, I like you, I love you, but that 30 days, that just got pushed to 90. Well, that could hurt you. So factoring, one nice benefit is that they're not necessarily concerned overall with the past performance like a bank might be. They're focusing on what's the quality of whoever owes you money. So if you have $1 million that Raytheon owes you, as a factoring company, you feel pretty good about that Raytheon's going to pay up at some point. Versus if it's Jim Bob's a small factory that's been up for 30 days, there's going to be some risk there. Again, it's just bridging a timing gap from when you provide that good of service to when you get paid. And last but not least, I'll torch you with leasing companies. I love leasing companies. They're great for small businesses in that think of it as you're growing, you need capital, but maybe you're not bankable. But you've got a good business, good products, good idea. Well, you could go to a leasing company and say, listen, if you could buy this piece of equipment for me, you own it, you have your first deed of title, UCC filing on it, and then lease that to me. That's not a large capital expenditure I have to pay, and I just lease it from you, and hopefully work out a deal over time, I can buy it back from you. So again, all of these scenarios are alternative financings that each and everyone in of themselves could deserve an hour or more a day just to devoting the various methodologies and modes for those. This hopefully just sparks, gets those creative juices flowing on what is or is not relevant to your business, what could or could not be useful to you. And with that, I will stop torching you on finance at this point of the day and hand it over.
Let me continue. I wanted to talk about some other alternative financing methods. Obviously, and I think everyone would understand that your cheapest source of money is most likely going to be Ralph's bank loan if you've got to get money either through the debt or equity markets. But there are other ways to raise money, and sometimes they have less hassles or they're advantageous to you. For example, if you're trying to, you need to raise capital because you're growing your business, you might ask your seller to finance all or a portion of that. The sellers often want to have a nice return on their money. They're getting X million for their business, but now what are they going to do? They don't want to put it in the bank and earn 0.1% per year interest rate on that. They'd be happy to lend it to you for 5, 6, 8% of return. So you might be able to use seller finance as one alternative. Another would be customer or vendor finance. You want to buy some widgets or machines or parts to do what you need to do, see if you can pay that vendor in 90 days after delivery so that you've got some time to try to turn that into cash flow for your business. There's also crowdfunding. There's really two kinds of crowdfunding that I want to talk about. One in particular is the non-securities related crowdfunding. It's also sometimes called contribution or donative crowdfunding that doesn't involve the issuance of a security. So, you've got a product you want to develop, and you put something on Indiegogo or Kickstarter or GoFundMe and say, I'm going to come up with this newest, greatest product. Pay me $50 and you'll get the first batch of these, that comes off the line. And one of our audience members here has successfully used that. He was telling me before the seminar began, and it's a wonderful way. You're not selling an interest in your company. You don't have to give up ownership. You don't owe money. All you do is owe the product, whether it's a book or a widget or a service that eventually may come out. I've had clients use that successfully in the past. Another thing, The other side of crowdfunding is the securities side of that. And the SEC, as of today, the new rules just went into effect for allowing equity-based crowdfunding to go into effect in the U.S. The regs are 630 pages long, so I don't think everybody here has read them, but for the most part, you can raise up to $1 million from investors, whether they're accredited investors or just general members of the public. There's all kinds of restrictions on how you can do that, though, and we'll talk more about the securities law aspects in a second. But crowdfunding is a new tool that you have available to you. My view of that is, if that's your last alternative available, then fine, go for it. But if you can raise money through other means, including SEC Regulation D, which we'll also talk about in a minute, that's probably going to be more advantageous to you than trying to go the crowdfunding route. But if that's your alternative, go for it. The securities laws regulate any time you are selling an interest in your company. And that's not just selling equity, common stock or preferred stock in your company, but it really attracts to any time you are having someone give you money and they're expecting to share in the profits and benefits from this enterprise based on your efforts. And so, securities involve everything from equity offerings, debt offerings, convertible debt that can convert into equity. It includes straight debt, so a loan. If someone's lending you money, when Ralph lends your company money, technically he's issuing a security to you. Now, why don't you have to go and comply with all the securities laws when that happens? It's because he as a bank is exempt. But if you get, 300 investors to loan you a portion of that loan, all of a sudden this is a security and it's not going to be exempt unless it's 300 banks, which likely isn't the case. So the securities laws creep up in a lot of different ways, and it's very important to keep that in mind anytime you're getting people to invest in your company. Why should you care? Why should you care about complying with the securities laws? Let's start with, you are most likely going to have personal liability for any material misstatements or omissions that are made in connection with that sale. Whether you make those misstatements or anyone else involved in the sales effort makes them, you're all jointly and severally liable. So you want to make sure you do it carefully. The things you say have to be well crafted. It's advisable to tell people about the risks of this potential investment, because if you don't do that, you may end up being the deep pocket that everybody tries to sue at the end of the day, because you said, oh, this is a for sure 25% investment return, we can't fail, we've got a fabulous market, we've got 27 orders that well, we thought they were going to come in, but all of a sudden they never came in. Well, you promised your investors that you had those booked, et cetera. So it's very important to make sure that you're trying to do these things right. The securities laws regulate really three aspects of every transaction. One is whether you need to register your offering, and you have to register and be a public offering, which is extremely expensive, and only a small fraction of companies ever go through an IPO, or whether you're exempt. And there's a whole lot of exemptions. Crowdfunding's one, Reg D is one. There's other exemptions out there, but you either have to be registered or exempt, both at the federal level as well as with the various states or other jurisdictions in which you're selling. Also, the anti-fraud rules regulate the nature of the disclosures, and you can't have fraudulent misstatements or omissions that would make the statements you make misleading or fraudulent. And so that's the one where you have the personal liability. Even if you're selling on behalf of a corporation or an LLC, that's where you can have the joint and several personal liability. And then finally, the securities laws are regulating if you're paying any commissions to anybody for helping you find those investors, whether they call it a finder's fee or a securities brokerage commission, anything like that. There are very strict laws, and if you blow any one of those three things, that can trigger the liabilities under the securities laws. So I do encourage you to go and get professional advice early and often as you're starting this, because it's a lot of time it's very difficult to unring the bell when that occurs. But the the securities laws allow you to raise the money. With crowdfunding, with Reg D, you can really raise unlimited amounts of, under Reg D, you can raise unlimited amounts of money if you sell only to accredited investors. Reg D does allow you to sell up to 35 people who aren't accredited, and let's just say accredited investors are people who have a net worth excluding their house of about $1 million. There's other kinds of accrediteds, but let's ignore them for the purposes of this discussion. But if you sell to one non-accredited, then all of a sudden you have to give specified disclosure materials to those investors, which includes audited financial statements, which Bob can talk about, and other things like that. So I think if you can raise money through an accredited offering, that's your best and easiest way. It's a lot easier than trying to comply with the new crowdfunding rules. It gives you less strings on the back end, because the new crowdfunding rules impose an ongoing financial statement disclosure that the Reg D offering doesn't have. So try to do a Reg D offering with accredited investors only if you can. If not, examine some other alternatives. And
All right.
Talk to you about accounting and finance and tax and dealing with professionals, Bob Semple.
The financial statements and accountants are generally a necessary evil in the process of raising capital. We oftentimes get a contact from a company that's in the process of raising capital, and they go to a bank, or they meet with an angel investor, or they meet with an institutional investor, and the question is, do you have CPA prepared financial statements? And they often respond, no. Do I need them? And so oftentimes we get involved with these companies because they need financial statements in order to raise capital. So one of the things I would tell people is always anticipate the needs that you're going to have for a business, and what level of financial statements that you need. Generally, compilation financial statements, there's no level of assurance. By a CPA, they're fine for management's internal use. Even some angel investors will accept them, but generally not. You need, at a minimum, reviewed level financial statements for most angel investors or small institutional investors, and banks. They want a review level statement. An audited statement is generally required when you're dealing with larger capital needs, larger institutional investors, and some of the companies that we work with are actually raise capital, let's say on a Fidelity platform, and we're a PCOB approved firm, so we deal with small and mid-market public companies, which is a requirement for companies like Fidelity to allow you to raise money on their platform. So clients come to us typically, again, at a point where they need a financial statement. We generally try to tell them, look, anticipate your financing needs. Don't get an audit just because you think you might need an audit down the road. Start with a reviewed financial statement, step up to an audit as you go. Oftentimes when clients have substantial inventory or in the manufacturing sector, we work with them on doing an inventory observation annually, so they can always upgrade to an audit, but not necessarily expend the kind of money they would need for an audit. We get a lot of clients that come into us looking to do financial forecasts or financial projections. Financial projections are typically a financial statement that has certain assumptions in it that are hypothetical, a what if, and typically as an accountant, we don't get involved with those. Clients will prepare them, we'll review them, and determine whether or not they seem to make sense, whether there seems to be a level of accuracy with them. But we can get involved with clients doing a financial forecast, which may be based on historical operations and projected growth in a business, or certain savings that they're going to reach based on certain segments of their manufacturing process. So I think that's pretty much it. So we'll go to questions and answers.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
We have a couple of other topics that we could pursue, but I think the most important objective here for the Business Council is to make sure your questions get answered. So I'd like to open the floor for questions, and if we don't quite have enough to run out up to our break time in about 10 minutes, then we will go back to the panel with a couple that I've kind of seeded for them. So Chris is coming around with a microphone. Let me ask you to stand if you wouldn't mind, and tell us your name and give us your question, please.
I'm Rick Cecil. TJ, usually on the VCs and angel investors, how much percent do they take?
Oh, there is no hard and fast rule or answer for that, unfortunately. The answer is it depends on how much leverage you have with your business and how badly they want your business. If you have just an idea and you have no financial wherewithal or means to execute that idea, they're probably going to get a pretty healthy return or healthy interest in your business, versus if you have clients in hand or in tow, or you have product designs all ready to go, and it depends on how much you need them. So again, it ranges all over the board, and it ranges by industry sector and by personality, and whether or not that person woke up that day and was in a good mood and wanted to be generous with their money and do something more exciting and creative than maybe they usually would do, or if they had a fight with their spouse. Again, it does get down to that level, unfortunately. Now, they do try to be more subjective and put their business financial mind hat on and figure out, look at this business, how can I make money off of this, how will they make me money, and then what's the speed at which they can take this to market for that market share, and then they will figure out, they'll back into their own mind what their valuation is of your business. And you're going to have your own valuation of your business. They will rarely ever meet. In fact, I've never seen them meet, at least at the first conversations. But unfortunately, there is no hard answer to that. It woefully depends on you.
But it would help to call TJ.
There's no ranges or anything?
I'm sorry, say again?
There's no ranges of percentages, like
Start at
VC?
51. I would start at 51%. Is where they would typically have if I was in where they would have the conversation at 51%.
That's a VC.
Yeah,
The angel would be less, right?
Angels would be less, and it also depends on what's the long-term goals for banking purposes. For example, I look at less than 20%, because if you own 19.9%, when you go to get institutional debt financing, you do not have to provide a personal guarantee on said financing. So there's a rhyme and a reason for what the percentages that someone's going to ask for. So VCs, I think mentally start 51%. Angel investors, hopefully a little bit less.
Yeah, my name is Pankaj Sinha, and as Rick mentioned that I just finished almost finishing a crowdfunding. One of the benefits of that is we got a contact from distributors and some of the investors. I'm getting some interest from investors from outside, foreign investors, and I mean they're kind of like angel investors, but they're foreign. So how do we deal with that? I mean, do we treat them just like the U.S. rules or different rules?
Because you're selling the securities, if you're issuing securities to them, you've got to comply with U.S. securities laws plus the laws of wherever they're a resident. So if they are, say, in Canada or Great Britain or something like that, you would want to make sure you're complying both with the U.S. as well as the foreign laws. Typically, the U.S. laws are going to be among the most stringent. So if you comply with the U.S., there's a good chance you're going to be in compliance with the others. Although certainly if your offering requires financial statements and registration and stuff in that foreign jurisdiction, you've got to make sure your financial statements, for example, meet their requirements. UK GAAP is different than US GAAP, for example. But for the most part, many parts of the world, they really don't have active securities regulation, but we typically would pair up with a licensed attorney in that jurisdiction. We do a lot of offerings, for example, with Canadian investors, because there's an awful lot of money there through the Toronto Stock Exchange and other places that they're looking on a private offering basis. And their requirements are often a lot less stringent than from U.S. firms. And so, consider alternatives. There's not necessarily one way to raise capital.
Other questions?
I'm Jason Dowden. Robert, in forming a company or having a young company and to go raise capital, how much thought should go into what type of business entity and or tax selection when you form, thinking that in the future you'll raise capital?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally, most of our clients will start off as a limited liability company, and I'm not gonna give legal advice, but a limited liability, company, because they can always convert to a corporation, will generally elect subchapter S, so that if there are losses, they can pass through, can be taken individually, subject to basis, and again, it's always convertible. We can always convert it to a corporation, convert it to a C Corp, elect out of the S. But so typically, as a small business startup, we would recommend a client start as a limited liability company. We had a company recently that came in, and he said, no, I'm starting as a C Corp. I know where I'm going with this thing. I know what I want to do. I'm doing a roll-up. He started with a business doing about $10 million in business, and he's done some acquisitions, but he knows exactly where he's going. And so, as much as I argued with him, he said, no, we're gonna go in as a C because I want to keep all the equity in the company, all my earnings. I'm going to pay my tax because I want to continue to build the business. And so he knew where he was going with it. So if somebody has a direction, they know exactly what they're doing with the company, then we obviously will go along with the flow. But typically, we would recommend something other than a C Corp.
I'd just add to that, it really also depends on where you expect your investor base to be. If it's a very small group that can deal with K-1s and flow through tax treatment and that kind of stuff, especially if you elect the flow-through treatment, then everyone's going to have to pay tax on any earnings, whether you give them the money to pay that tax or not. So that works for a relatively small investor pool, but as soon as you start trying to raise money with a lot of different small investors, or imagine if you're crowdfunding and you get 1,000 people that you now have to process K-1s for and deal with that, and they're complaining that you haven't given them money to pay the tax, and blah blah blah. What a nightmare. So think about where you expect your investor base to be.
And just to dovetail on that, I cannot emphasize the importance of begin with the end in mind. Is this going to be a lifestyle business where you can leave your current job that you hate and you can run this and be happy, or do you want to grow this thing to some huge monstrosity and then sell it off and go live on an island drinking Mai Tais or something? That is important because that will have an implication as to how you structure the business, both from a legal standpoint, whether it's LLC, S, C Corp, you name it, or how you drive the business, who you hire, what kind of counsel you take on. Many people just think, I've got to get in business, I have to start something. Well, take a moment to actually take a breath, think about what you want to be, where you want to go, and have a roadmap. And even if it's not a 30-page or 50-page or 100-page business plan, which nobody's reading, to be quite frank, it's a one-page summary. Figure out a game plan of what is going to be good for your lifestyle, for your family, for your mode of operation, and what you want out of it. Have a number in mind. If I hit X, I'm gone, and don't be greedy. And I've seen more often than not, the element of greed kills most deals. And it's personality and greed, one or the other. And so if you can understand how much you want to make and where you want to go, you're ahead of most people, in my opinion.
Other questions? Don't be shy. You've got a lot of intelligence and experience in the front of this room. It's a good time to take advantage of it.
These guys.
Chris Kern here. I have a question for Ralph. Ralph, in regards to getting a loan with your bank, what's the timing and process to go through that?
Like TJ said, we're probably not as quick as we want to be, but you got to understand, so I'm a $90 million bank. We go over our pipeline once a week. Right now I've got 13 million sitting in my pipeline, so chances are when your loan request comes in, it's not the only thing our loan officer's going to be working on. He's probably got 5 in front of it. So, give yourself north of 30 days typically, and come in with your house of cards in order. I don't know, I'm dealing with a client right now, I'm having lunch with them next week. Okay, I did the following 8 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2 of them come in. You have everything you need. It's like, you have the list, check it off when you send it to me. So have a complete package, or get it together, in a timely manner, and that helps expedite the process.
Yuval Lauren, perhaps for you, Ralph. If as a business, acquisition is on the roadmap, 3 to 5 years, what are the things that we can do today to be in a position in 5 years to get the money that we need to do that?
So you obviously have a vision of what you're looking to buy, how big it's going to be, and what you're willing to pay as a price, right? So when I talk about the balance in the balance sheet, the capital level relative to how much debt you're looking at, make sure you start getting your balance sheet, your capital position in order, whether you have to follow one of these gentlemen's regime to get your capital from 2 to 5 million, allowing you to take on an additional 7 million in debt, whatever that number. So check your capital ratios and build the team. The last thing I kind of talked about was competency. Chances are your business is going to take on a different perspective when you go multi-state or different product lines. So make sure that you can explain to people that the competency is coming from these various levels. The other beauty there is if something happens to you, one of the things we didn't really discuss is I want to know that if you're not around, if you get hit by the proverbial Pred truck, what then? How am I going to get repaid? And all too often I hear, oh, my wife's involved in the business. Yeah, she's your bookkeeper. Or my son's involved in the business. Yeah, he's in the packaging department. They're not going to run it. So build the team that's going to help grow, because you're going to start growing exponentially when you're acquiring companies. It also helps if you can demonstrate the fact that you've executed on, maybe not an acquisition this big, but new product lines, so it lessens the execution risk.
But part of that is also getting to know your banker early and keeping them up to speed for how your business is, so that they've gotten some comfort and know you when you do want to go to them for that business line or the increase in the credit limit to do that acquisition. They're not starting from scratch.
Anyone else, comments? No? Have another question, I think?
Yeah, and this really could be for any of you. Of all the stuff we've talked about today, what do you think is the most underutilized or surprising source of capital that isn't accessed, more widely?
And may we have your name, please?
Caleb Huftel.
Thank you.
I just want to address something, and for small amounts of capital, I'm not talking about a $10 million company. I'm a firm believer that home equity lines of credit are perfect for small business people, but I'm also here to tell you, with the advent of Dodd-Frank, they're a third less available today than they were 5 years ago when Dodd-Frank got implemented. But it's a wonderful piggy bank. You don't want to tap it out. It's cheap. It's your cheapest source of funding, and the beauty is most are put in on a 10-year term. If I do traditional bank financing or line of credit for you, it's typically going to be on an annual renewal. How nice it'd be to have a 10-year facility just kind of laying there for you.
Also, friends and family. I mean, that's, we didn't really talk much about that, but most businesses that are startups, they start with friends and family financing. They've got people that believe in them, believe in their idea, and that's really, to me, that gives us a great deal of comfort that when friends and family are investing in a business, they're investing in an individual and supporting an individual, and that says a lot to the financial markets. When you go for angel funding, you go to the bank for conventional financing. When you've got friends and family that have invested in the business, that tells them somebody believes in you.
You're not going to say mezzanine finance is the most underused?
Well, it's non-existent really in the state. So I'll dovetail one thing for one moment. So as far as venture capital, there's not really much of any of it in this state. It's all in the West Coast, California. As far as mezzanine capital, it doesn't really exist out here. If you're looking for anything less than $5 million, it's very difficult, especially in the state. And that's, one, not to put too fine a point on it, that's one of the reasons why I'm managing, running a new fund just to solve that particular issue. So there's the direct answer to your question, but I think more broadly, what so many people, whether they're experienced or inexperienced, and I know I look like I'm 12 up here, I promise you, it's not my first rodeo, but what I see more often than not is businesses forget that they are in business to make money, period. If you're not, it's called a nonprofit, and you should be a nonprofit, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if people get so wrapped around the axle around a cool idea or an app or an invention, and they try and create something to go find a problem to solve instead of the other way around. And so if you lose track of the fundamentals as to why you're in business and how you should conduct that business, you're going to find it exponentially harder to find people to give you money for your business. And so again, the old adage, if you don't understand something, you shouldn't be investing in it. And so if someone needs a PhD to get your product, whether you haven't explained it to them or that's just the wrong investor. But again, so there's a balancing act, and quite often what I see in the mezzanine world is that people have gotten so excited and so woefully out of whack with the balance sheet, or they think they're going to make $1 million in the first 2 years, hockey stick projections. To be frank, the financials really aren't that, no one looks at 5-year projections and says, yes, that's great. I mean, the best I've ever seen is maybe 9 months someone could project out. I mean, if you could project 5 years from now, you wouldn't be talking to any of us. You'd be doing a lot better, right? So, try to be realistic about what you can accomplish.
TJ, are there times when you should not consider mezzanine financing?
There are. There are. So I'm being honest. So if you don't make enough margin on your business, you shouldn't be in alternative financing quite often because you can't afford it, whether it be mezzanine, factoring, or some other hard money or something else. And people often take the ill-advised gamble of, hey, if I could just get access to this money, magically everything's going to fall in line in the next 6 months. I can pay it back. And it's going to be great. Well, we have bankruptcy courts because of that. I mean, quite often that's not what happens. Life happens. Things change. And so look to mezzanine when you're quasi-bankable, but not maybe you don't check all the boxes that you need for them to know and like and love you to be able to extend credit. I want to get you to bankability because that's going to be your least expensive, I won't call you cheap, just your least expensive capital versus equity, which is you're giving up ownership. And I want every business to still own their business. That's what you should. You put your heart and soul into what you're working on. Don't let somebody take that away from you. And quite often people are so blindsided by just raising money that next thing you know they've worked themselves out of a job or out of a business that they used to love, and then they're jaded. But
good, thank you. I'd just like to kind of wrap up with one other question. Any other lessons that you've learned worth sharing, or pitfalls that might be encountered by a business along the way that has not come up yet? Any of the panelists or all of you?
Just quickly, in almost 30 years of banking and well over 1,000 sets of loan docs executed, I've probably only seen 20 people actually read them verbatim. You kind of need to know what's in there. So it's nice if your banker can get them to you a day or 2 or 3 ahead of time. Read them. A lot of it's going to be boilerplate language, and no, they're not going to change the boilerplate because it's been approved by council. But there's going to be covenants in there, things you have to do. Make sure you're comfortable doing those before you sign the documents, because you kind of have a carrot waving out there of the money, but make sure you're confident you can execute.
You'd like to add?
Yeah, I'd offer a few ideas from lessons learned over the years. First of all, protect your, what you have. Protect your competitive advantages, whether it's intellectual property, making sure your agreements with your employees are in place so that they can't go out and compete with you, getting agreements with customers and vendors that they're not going to steal your ideas, those kinds of things. Keep your exit strategy in mind, as TJ mentioned earlier. There is never a perfect time, so if you're waiting for that perfect time to grow your company or raise the capital or whatever, and you think the capital markets aren't right, it's not necessarily true, because there's a lot of money sitting out there on the sidelines looking for the right company. The corollary to that is when you're in a deal, time is not your friend. Get it done quickly, move through, do what you can to get it done, because things can happen that have absolutely nothing to do with you, whether it's the economy tanking or plane flying into a building, whatever, you have health problems. So get through as quickly as you can. The best deal may be the one you don't do. Don't be afraid to walk away, whether it's a proposed financing or a proposed acquisition, those kinds of things. Have the sense to say no if they're asking for too much. And then finally, don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Get advice, get help along the way, because if you could do it all, you you wouldn't be sitting in this room asking for help.
Last comment.
Well, yeah,
DJ. Either you.
I'll be quick.
Yeah, my comment, I was going to follow up on something the speaker, Craig, said, and we see it so often, and that is companies that go out and attract investment, they bring in investors. The investors have certain expectations of an exit strategy or how much money they're going to make, and it doesn't come to fruition, and it creates a lot of tension and a lot of stress internally, and oftentimes litigation. And we do quite a bit of litigation support on business divorces. And it's because they were so concerned about attracting money and not concerned about making certain that they had the same goals and objectives with their investor group as their management group had. And so I say when you're raising capital, again, it can be a blessing, but it can also be a curse. So make sure that you've got a synergistic investor, and they understand your business, and they share your goals and dreams for the business. And they'll be helpful in the business, in your growth of the business, and not harmful.
And my last thought would just be, an old phrase I heard and learned a long time ago and took to heart: never underestimate the human capacity for greed, and you will never be disappointed. So quite often, people forget their position and their leverage, what they do and do not have, and how much of it they have. Try to get out of your own way, because the old adage is very true. If your business can't run without you, you don't have a business, you have a job. And we invest in businesses.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions. Can we get a round of applause for the panel?
That was a great panel. I really enjoyed that. It was very well laid out. I hope all of you took notes. Our next guest speaker is a good friend of mine, a gentleman I've been admiring for a long time since I got back to the Valley. A member of my good friend Doug Brunke from Growth Nation and the Global Chamber introduced me to Lee Benson about 10 years ago. I watched his company grow. He grew it up to over $100 million in revenue, if I'm not mistaken. As you can read in the bio, Lee is CEO of Able Aerospace Services, a leading provider of FAA-approved replacement parts, repairs, and overhaul exchanges. Started his career as an employee, bought the company, and managed to grow it quite large. He sold it to Textron Aviation for an undisclosed amount. He's still running the company, and he has quite a success story to share with all of us. Lee Benson, thank you for coming today.
All right, it works. All right, good afternoon. I think half of us cleared out. Hopefully it's just a restroom break. They'll be back. That'll be nice. All right, so I was asked to share our experiences and what it took to get past that $10 million in revenue barrier, as a company. So how many are left in the audience here that that you own a small business or you're a senior leader in a small business that would like to break the $10 million barrier and you haven't yet? How many do we have? Okay, so there's a few of you out there. All right, so in going through this, for those of you who don't know much about our story, I'll just share a little bit about the history and set up what we do. So what we essentially do as a company is we repair, overhaul, and manufacture aircraft parts for aircraft operators globally. We typically only deal with aircraft operators directly. We want to skip the middleman everywhere we can. And the only reason they send us work is because we safely reduce the cost to operate the aircraft. A pretty simple business. So the history that we went through, and it's pretty interesting. You've got this in the handout, and I'm not going to go through everything in there. I just wanted to give you enough information to go back and review if you wanted to. But I was the first employee back in 1982 in a very small company that did electroplating by hand, just one small job shop, one process company. Company was sold to Able Distributing in 88, and then I bought it in 93 when we lost all of our business overnight. So this was late 93, had 25 employees, went down to 3 employees, and my boss said, close it or sell it. You've got 30 days. I couldn't find anybody to buy it, so I went back and said, look, I've got this great idea that you told me would never work. How about I assume the debt, about $200,000, and I would give you another $400,000 if I turn it around, but I get to decide whether I can afford it and pay it someday. And, of course, he jumped on it and said yes. And I remember hearing third hand, bragging to his friends about I stuck this kid with a bunch of debt. I would flail for about a year and then go out of business. Well, our plan was we would go out there into the market, and we had this great idea where we would save customers a lot of money on the parts that they typically would buy new. And our plan was, let's get to $5 million. And once we do that with helicopter operators, then we'll go out to large airlines, and it actually all really worked out for us as we went through it. So we've actually moved 9 times, all for growth in the history of this. Now we've got about 230,000+ square feet that we're working on. Actually started Able Engineering from scratch in 95, Able Aerospace in 99, a software company in 99, and then that software company turned into what I now call Execute to Win, where I roll all the assets into it in 2011. So where we're at today, we've got about 500 employees. My guess is over the next 5 years we'll grow to over 800 organically. We're also looking at a number of businesses to buy and bring on board. We have over 1,400 customers in 60 countries around the world. 40% of the work we do is international, and that's how I got involved with Doug Brunke. I'm really interested in anything we can do to export better. We're positioned to really double in the next 3 years. My guess is we'll probably do better than that with everything that's going on. And we did sell 2 of our aerospace companies to Textron, and we combined it into one company called Able Aerospace Services in January of this year. So key evolutionary steps, what did we learn along the way? What were the big steps? The first one was, how do we come up with a product or service to offer the customer? So we went from no business to how are we going to get there? In 1994, our sales were $300,000. And our CapEx budget that year was $175, where we went to an auction and bought a bunch of benches and other things where we could actually lay our stuff out. And we had virtually nothing. So we went out and interviewed our customers and found 8 parts that they were throwing away, and we figured out we could repair them. And before we started working directly for the operators, Honeywell, back then it was Allied Signal, we would charge them $300 to repair something, and then they would maybe look at it, inspect it, and then sell it to their customer for $10,000. So the bright idea was, hey, let's just go direct to the customer, charge them, the operator charge them $5,000, and as we had enough business, we would start bringing in processes and building everything. So we built a machine shop, and it's a pretty amazing shop today, and what one process built us into. And when it comes to raising money, it's been 100% debt financing to get us here. I would say first year was credit cards in my house, so home equity financing. And we had the discipline every single year to leave 50% of the money in the company for growth. The other half largely went for taxes, plus a little bit for the shareholders. So with that discipline, we never had to go to outside investors to do that. Second one, build the team. The 2 guys that were left standing with me, incredibly talented. They're still here today, and they got an amazing payout in this equity deal that just transpired. In fact, I remember one of the guys said it'll never work because this first year I couldn't afford to pay either one of them. He said, we don't have money, we don't have customers, we don't have any equipment, but he did say, sign me up anyway, I just want to see what's going to happen. And he got the second largest payout, so I'm really happy with that and how it worked out. Get the partner and shareholder agreements right. I learned the hard way before, and vicariously through my friends, before I actually took the company over. So we put agreements together where if any of the owners or shareholders left for any reason whatsoever, and my deal was they had to work in the company, you can't be an outside shareholder. You have to sell your stock back at a preset price, whether you leave for any reason whatsoever, again, or no reason at all. And I think a lot of folks, when they get into business, they don't think about what the divorce is going to look like. I mean, you have to plan forward thinking, if it ends, how are we going to do this to where it's equitable for everybody? And that really worked out well, because I can't think of anything worse than having somebody that really didn't bring a lot of capability or value, and they sit there on the side with their hand out constantly, right? That would have been terrible, and I've seen that happen a number of times. And then strategy, alignment, and culture. So as we evolved in thinking about our strategy, one of the only reason we get work is because we're the best value alternative for our customers. That's it. So we have to be better than the competition. So we've been doing this process for probably 14 years now, where we ask 5 questions as we build up for our strategy. And the first question is, from a macro sense, what's going on in the industry? This big picture for the market segments that we can actually hit. Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is there more regulation, more competition? Whatever that is. Second question, what have our strongest competitors done in the last year to change the game, and how did it work out for them? We intensely study the competition. We absolutely need to stay 1, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of them at any point in time. Third question, what did we do in the last year to change the game, to drive more business into our facility? How did it work out for us, and what could have been better? So we go through that. Fourth question, what keeps you up at night? We spend a lot of time on this. In our industry, safety's everything. We have one accident that could take us completely out of the game. We don't want that to happen. And then the last question, what are we going to do in the next year to take as much work away from the competition as we want to by being the best value alternative for our customers? So we always have that plan going forward. So how has this worked out? For the last 14 years, we've had on average better than 20% compounded annual growth. Every year, we put our projections out there. We have to execute. There's no guarantees. This year, we expect to be in the 28, 29% growth top line and probably north of 70% bottom line growth. So the bigger we get, the faster we're going along those lines by following this process. This takes about 5 hours when we go through it, and we're constantly looking at this and updating it throughout the year. And then when it comes to executing on strategy, so you get all this information, how are you going to accomplish it? So this is a pretty simple graphic to kind of explain how we cascade this down through the organization. But at the top level, we set a scoreboard. So the entire company knows, are we winning or losing? In fact, I think in a lot of organizations out there that we see, they're asking people to play a football game without a scoreboard. So they don't know what the score is, they don't know what down it is, they don't know any of that stuff. So it's pretty tragic, especially as you go throughout the organization. So we'll set the scoreboard. Are we winning or losing? It's being regularly updated. We put strategy guides in, so we're fully staying aligned and doing the things we should do and not doing the things that we shouldn't do. And then we have our revenue sources, and then we set up what we call operative group or functional groups inside the organization. So these functional groups, they have their own scoreboards, and from there they set what we call major objectives. And these major objectives are the most important things that the functional group leader should be accomplishing. And then from there, they basically create performance requirements that will link back to the major objectives. And every single employee in our organization now, we've evolved right into, they have performance requirements, which are the most important outcomes that they're responsible for, connected all the way back to major objectives in our strategy. And everyone in the organization can see what everybody else is doing, 100% transparency. It's pretty interesting. I hear a lot of folks say, hey, you can't really do that, and especially HR organizations. And I ask, well, why not? Well, you're just not supposed to share it. But if you go to a baseball game, you see the stats up on the Jumbotron, right? And you might be the first baseman, you may not like your batting average, but you're not complaining, it's up there. What we figured out is the more everybody can see what everybody else is doing and see their stats, better chance of winning the game. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's worked out really well for us. And this is kind of a simple graphic to say, we actually created software to run our business, and the whole purpose of the software is to sustain and scale a business management operating system, i.e. what does every employee do daily, weekly, monthly, et cetera, to get extraordinary results. And so in this graphic, we can have a key performance indicator at the top that isn't right, and this is live, living, breathing software inside the organization. You can click into that. You can see all the major objectives associated with it, which ones aren't performing. You can click into that, see every employee that has performance requirements linked to it, and you can see all the conversations about what we're doing, what's working, what's not working. And this, again, is living and breathing, and it's not an option for our employees to deal with it. It's a condition of working there. If they don't want to do it, they can't be there, especially the leadership team. So it's a really easy way to go through it. Now, when I got the idea to create this, it was after I had a meeting with Jack Welch about probably 8 years ago now, and there were 100 people in the room, all of them there to learn Jack's methodologies and all the things that worked. And most of them managing over $1 billion in business. We were just coming off probably a $10, $11 million year at that time. And that's where I got the idea to do this. And we did it just to run our business. We've had so many people looking at it. This is now another business that I've started, and I'm running at the same time I'm running the Textron company. So it's actually going in a good direction. So with any one of our companies, we can always start a number of things and go a number of different directions. So real simple, what we figured out over time is that, and this is right out of basic lean manufacturing, that every employee in the organization, every team needs to be planning, doing, checking, and adjusting on the right appropriate interval going through. And what that looks like for us is every month we finish a month, we update all the scoreboards or key performance indicators in the organization. And then every employee, once a month, they update their performance requirements with what they're doing. They state where they're at the plan, and at least 3 things they're doing to improve that number, even if they're beating it. And this is 100% of the employees in the organization. And then every manager is required to give supportive and developmental feedback for those mandatory monthly updates. And this is where managers are developing employees to bring more value to the organization for every dollar of payroll that we invest in them. And then all the team meetings happen. So every employee in the organization meets with their manager no less than once a month for 1 full hour with the goal of developing that employee to take it to the next level. And then small team meetings meet, go over their strategy guide, they go over their key performance indicators, and then larger functional groups meet where they share best practices across teams. And then my favorite meetings of the month, at the end of the month, I meet with every single functional group. These are 1-hour meetings. It takes me, there are 22 meetings, so roughly 22, 23 hours of total meetings. And I go through, here's how the company performed. Here's how you fit into it. You've already had your meetings, and I might have a few questions about it. And then they get 30 minutes of Q&A. And I've never seen another company at this level that has everybody so incredibly on the same page as a result of doing it. So it sounds like a lot of time, but I can't tell you how much time it's saving me, and we're going a lot faster. And then intentional culture. Culture when you're a small business, I used to think this is pretty warm and fuzzy and it really doesn't mean a whole lot. And I don't think people really understand the value of culture, even though so many talk about it, until they haven't been able to execute on their strategy because of just normal human nature dysfunction. And everybody's passion for hitting the end result, they forget to be respectful, they don't always do what they say they will, those kinds of things. And so as we struggled through that and I realized, hey, we work really hard, we're getting a lot smarter, but we need to be a healthier organization, that's when we took culture very serious. So simple definition of culture that we subscribe to is what we agreed to do and how things get done. And what we agreed to do is our mission, and how things get done would be leadership traits and behaviors in the organization. Now, I don't know if you probably would say yes, but when you really analyze and audit everything you do in your business, everything a business does should be done to make it measurably better. Everything else is a waste of time and resources. Would you generally agree with that? Okay. When it comes to alignment tools, most organizations go into the camp of look good, feel good, or sound good, nothing to do with how it's going to make the organization measurably better. So when we developed our alignment tools, before we even drafted them, we wanted to come up with how it was going to make us measurably better before we did it. So our mission statement, we wanted it to tell customers why they do business with us and every employee why they have a job. This is what we did. So our mission is to safely reduce aircraft operating costs by providing resourceful component repair, overhaul, and approved replacement parts solutions. So for our customers, that means a lot. I've had customers come in I've never met before, first words out of their mouth, your mission saved me so much money, I was able to buy another helicopter or another aircraft. I mean, it's that big of a deal. And then when it comes to behaviors and leadership traits, and I won't go through all of these, but here's a way to think about it if you ever want to develop it. 15, 16 years ago, we had a set of values, and top value was integrity, and we had it plastered all over the building on these really nice posters. And I went back and I talked to 10 employees and asked them the question, how are you applying integrity to make us measurably better? And I got 10 crazy answers that told me we were completely wasting our time and money on this, completely wasting it. We had all this expensive wallpaper around the facility. So then we went back and said, well, what are we really trying to accomplish? If the only reason we get work is because we're a better value alternative in the eyes of our customers compared to the competition, then that's what we need to accomplish. So if we could create a scenario where 50% or more of the employees inside our company are performing, behaving as good or better than the top 10% at our strongest, most admired competitors, what kind of an advantage would that give us? And we all fell out of our chairs. That would be amazing if we could accomplish it. So what did they do? And at the time, we probably had, I think it was exactly 70 employees. We said, this is what we're trying to accomplish. From your view, please write down the observable behaviors of the best performing employees you've ever worked with on their best days. And we had 68 of our employees participate in the survey. Huge list came in, but so many commonalities that distilled down to the 6 behaviors we're using today. So, enable high-performing employees throughout the organization. They do what they say they will. They have a personal commitment to the end result. They present and pursue permanent solutions as opposed to dwelling on problems. We have 6 behaviors, 6 leadership traits. I won't go through all of them. What's different about our organization is every 6 months, every employee has to get in our system and put in there how they applied each one of those. Just once, one example for each alignment tool every 6 months of how they applied it to make us measurably better as an organization. And they even take a shot at quantifying it. How is it helping us improve profitability or customer experience? And this is every employee. I don't care if it's a janitor, a machinist, an engineer, it really doesn't matter. We have several that speak Spanish, a lot of difficulty with English. We still make that work. When they meet with their managers put it in for them, and then we help them with English language skills going through it. So if employees know the alignment tools, I don't think that means anything to us. That's not going to make you measurably better. In most companies, that's as far as they go. In our organization, you have to actually apply it. And once you get their thinking behind what applying it means, or their thinking behind what it means to improve a performance goal, then the manager knows how to be the best coach on the planet and help them. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how we went through it. So the leadership traits are in there. There's even a board with all of them if you want to look at it, a slide in there if you want to see that. So getting here to the last slide in the presentation. So the biggest lessons learned, we talked a little bit about it before, but talent really is everything. And I would say, other than when I'm selling for the businesses, I'm spending 90% of my time developing leadership throughout the organization. It's everything. I mean, there's nothing more important than that. But when it doesn't work out, help them find a job as quickly as you possibly can somewhere else. If they're a really bad performer, try to get them a job at your biggest competitor. It works really well, and do that. And then be so incredibly clear with expectations that every single employee knows exactly what's expected, where they stand 100% of the time, and there's never any surprises, ever. In fact, once we went to this model, I would say 60% of the employees that we would typically fire were able to absolutely save into solid middle performers because we're a lot more clear with the expectations. Just everybody doing a better job across the board. And not having a business management operating system, that was killing us. And we learned that along the way. So we ended up, putting this in place, and we did an analog for a long time. And then the bigger we got, we just needed technology to sustain and scale it. Again, I think everybody coming in should know what to do daily, weekly, monthly, et cetera, to get great results. And you should know what that is in all the different parts of the organization. And then standard work for leaders. This is kind of a relatively new concept in the last couple of years. But if you want to put out the same product with no defects whatsoever, you have to eliminate all variance in the process, right? And you make it the same way every single time. If you want the same consistent service, same thing, you eliminate all variance. Then how come we hire leaders, we put them over a group and say, here are the goals, now you figure out the best way to implement that stuff and get the result, right? So we've implemented standard work for leaders. We have about a 40-element checklist for all the leaders, and we rank them red, yellow, or green in every single category. And it's amazing how well that's worked to level set across the organization. And any leader can go to any other part. They know exactly how they're going to be rated, and they know exactly how each part's going to run. There's a playbook, and this is what we do. That has really launched our results to the next level. Really exciting concept there. And then when it comes to strategy, keep it amazingly simple. I think you win when you have a strategy where 80% of the employees appropriately at every level in the organization get it. Not just 2 or 3%, and everybody else turns their head sideways trying to figure out what you're doing. So we spend a lot of time on that. Culture, I went through that. That's pretty darn important. I think I went into it thinking that this is the foundation for everything, but we had to really emphasize execution before people understood that culture is important. It's just kind of a natural evolution. But it is interesting how so many people can talk about culture like they know what they're talking about, but the more you probe, you understand they really don't understand what it means, what culture is. And then the last one, be patient. I remember early on thinking, so I bought the company late '93. How come we're not getting there faster? And I didn't have a lot of knowledge about business. I had a lot of drive, that's for sure. I ended up joining tech, which turned into Vistage, and that was '97, so that helped. It was probably, for the first 7 years, I was not the highest paid person in the company. I had to hire engineers and other folks, and I just knew someday it was going to happen. And probably from 10 years on average, I paid over $1 million a year just in federal income tax. So it does get good, but you have to be patient. I've watched so many folks out there make really dumb mistakes early on. They take too much money out of the company, they over-leverage, they do all that. Unhealthy partnerships that they set up to get there faster. I think it's hard enough as a new business to get our head above water, and then how do you keep doing the stuff that works and have a process where you iterate constantly around doing it better till eventually you're soaring above the water. And the patience paid off for us. We didn't have to have, again, any angel outside investors, none of that going on. We didn't have to give equity away. And in selling the organization, making sure that the 500 families that depend on it are taken care of was incredibly important. So we waited for the right strategic buyer. I didn't think we'd sell for at least another 2 or 3 years. And ended up being the right strategic buyer. And so now there's more opportunities for our employees, and I probably could have presented to them in the next couple of years. So this is a good deal for everybody. So there it is, 15, 20 minutes on all the wisdom to get above $10 million. So those of you that raised your hand, you should be there within a year, I would think. Yeah, any questions about this? Didn't sound like there's a whole lot of business folks, business owners in the room. Yeah. Yeah, it's called Execute to Win. The website is etw.com. If you're interested, go to the website. If you're more interested after what you see, just click demo, and somebody will get back to you. Yeah, Chris. Yeah, frontline team members, they probably spend about 15 minutes a week in the system, non-supervisory team members. I check it all day long, like email. I could be in it for hours a day. But one of the things for me in terms of time savings is every single communication around a business goal or a alignment tool has to go in the system with very few exceptions. No emails, no sending out an email, copying 10 people, everybody replies all, and you take 3 hours collectively to do what should have taken 3 minutes. All that goes away. So in 20 minutes a day, I get this feed. There could be 15 items in there. There could be 50 items in there. And it's all communications around business goals and alignment tools. And it's usually mostly business goals that are in there. So it saves me 3,000 internal emails a month that I don't have to deal with anymore, which is amazing. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. And there was a case study that we did a couple of years ago. It was 2012. We set a goal to uncover 25% capacity, which would have been about 140,000 extra hours we would have had with the same labor force in operations. And at the end of the year, we calculated, it looked like we uncovered about 200,000 hours of capacity. That was 100 people we didn't have to hire to handle additional business. Guess what happened to our profits? Yeah, and their bonuses as well. Yes, sir. Well, the $200,000, I just assumed the debt. And so I just kept making the payments on it. And this company that had it before, they had about $400,000 in management fee that had racked up on the books. And I just said, look, if I turn it around, I'll pay that back, but no interest, and only if I can pay it back, and $3,000 a month. So 11 point whatever years, they got their $400,000 back. So it was no cash out of my pocket, and they walked away from $200,000 in debt that they would have had to pay. There's always a creative way to do it. Sometimes I think if you get a bunch of money, you end up having more of a tendency to do dumb things with it because you have it. And when you don't have it, it's amazing how creative you can be when you go after it, right? Yeah. So that was a good lesson too, all the way through. I never wanted to give up control of this. Yes, sir. Execute to Win. Yeah. We're really just now starting to push to get it out there, but there's over 50 clients using it. Some of them are as large as $10, $12 billion. Some as small as a couple $1 million a year. Yeah. Was there another question over here? No. Yes, sir. It started about 3 years ago with Bell Helicopter trying to work with us and put some sort of an agreement together. And it just sort of evolved from there. They approached us in June of last year and said, look, we'd rather not have an agreement and build you up to only have to buy you for a lot more someday. And we walked away from the table probably 3 times, and we finally came back with an agreement, and it worked out. And again, had to be the right strategic buyer. One of the things that they said, and they've learned their lesson, I think a lot of companies, big companies learn this, is they didn't want to hug us so tightly they kill us. Because you probably have seen the stories of, small company gets bought by big company, HR and legal and everything else comes in, puts all these extra requirements on you, and it just drives you into the ground, and it's unfortunate. And they've been really good to their word. I think they're studying us to figure out how they can implement more of the great things that we have into a broader part of their organization. And frankly, for me, it's just a ton of fun. I loved what I did before, which I think is different than a lot of business owners. It seems like they want to sell and get out of it and then go retire somewhere or conduct their hobbies. Love what I did before. I was perfectly fine financially before. I could have retired then. Now I'm even better off, which is great, and I get to keep doing what I love. And my sandbox got even bigger. So now I've got over 40,000 employees that I can influence. So for me, this is the funnest job on the planet. I'm having a blast. Sir. Yes. And we flow up under Textron Aviation. No, not. So they came in, purchased us, and we wrote. And they're perfectly fine with me running my software company on the side. I mean, how many CEOs have a hobby that builds a system that makes the company you're working for better? So, yeah, I mean, our vision over there at ETW is to change the way the world does business. If any of you have been to our facility, the culture there is incredible. And the engagement and just all of it. And I want the rest of the world to run that way. There's just too many stories out there of, employees. It's like the Walking Dead when you walk through the place. It's terrible. And the performance review process is terrible, goal deployment, I mean, all these things, forced rankings. The experience for each employee is terrible, and I want to change all of that. So this is kind of a cool why to get to what Craig was talking about earlier. Yeah. Yes, sir. No, we don't. He and I had a pretty big difference of opinion on how things should go, and I learned a lot. I learned probably more about what not to do than what to do, which is pretty darn valuable. But he was a successful business guy. I just had a different way of doing it, completely different way. Yeah, Chris. Well, I needed to learn, and I think everybody needs to do that. I think there's a real danger in picking somebody, as your mentor, because all mentors carry baggage. And I think books are great mentors. You can learn just constantly. You need to have a process where you do that. But between Vistage and Tech and the literally hundreds and hundreds of speakers, there's a nugget somewhere in there. Jack Welch and I sort of hit it off. We're going in the same direction, although he accomplished a little bit more than I did. He's been a great friend and opened lots of doors, and I've learned so much from him. That's been amazing, too. I don't know if I mentioned it, but Jack Welch, former CEO of GE, is a 10% owner inside ETW. Mm-hmm. And it's in alignment with what he wants to do. He wants to change the way the world does business as well, and he started the Jack Welch Management Institute. And it was late last year, we brought in for the first time 60 of their EMBA students and alumni, and I took them through a 2-day course on leadership and action and went through it. So they're everywhere. They're in this room. I mean, they're really everywhere. But to pick one and follow them, huge mistake in my view. But there's been a lot of them over the years. So, well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Wow. Well, I said a little while ago that Lee's one of my heroes. He's even a bigger hero. What a story. I'm really amazed by that. As an investment banker, I see lots of companies doing roughly 10 to 100 million in revenue. It's just amazing what you've done. It's everything you're doing is exactly what I would want to see if I was looking for an investor for your company. Do want to thank our sponsors. First of all, thank you, Lee Benson, for being here. And thank you, Craig Weiss, also for your presentation. They really set the stage for real life, what's going on. I think our panel did an outstanding job. Thank you to Fred for chairing it, Fred Croyne. Ralph Tapscott, T.J. Jennings, Rick Lieberman, and Bob Semple. Thank you so much for your participation. I think it was a real good panel. Very good. Also want to thank our committee that worked very tirelessly hard. Chris Kern, who's our vice president of our board. Sally Marinoff, I introduced earlier. Fred Croyne. Chet stepped right up to the plate. Thank you, Chet. Rick Lieberman, Ralph Tapscott, our wonderful banker friend. Linda really helped us a lot. She came up with a lot of great ideas in the last few days. And Paul Gallo, thank you for serving on the committee and for helping us pull it together. And a final shout out to our key sponsors, to Ray Shea from the Phoenix Business Journal. I don't know if Ray's here in the room. He told me last week he was going to try to make it, but we appreciate his support along with Kathy Bix. And also to Al Wyant from Event Interface, who set up the registration and all of that kind of thing. This is the first in a series. We're going to try to do these every spring and every fall. This obviously was our spring fling. I hope you feel like it was well productive for you, and we gave out a lot of nuggets for you to chew on and think about. Again, we're all volunteers for the Arizona Business Council. We're not a networking group. We're a 501c6. We pay $100 a year to be a member, and we're somewhat selective with each of the people that we let into the organization. We want to make sure that you've got a well-rounded experience. You can offer advice to lots of business owners, and we ask you to serve on a panel, hopefully at least once or twice a year. We try to run 2 companies through every month, as the way we've been doing in the past, and the panel will collect the documents from the business owner who applies. It's put into a virtual data room. We select through a process, we select the 8 panelists that will serve that month for each of the business owners. They are allowed into the Dropbox so they can look at the confidential information. No one else gets to see it, not the rest of the members. And the bankers will study it. We'll have 2 bankers, 2 CPAs, 2 general, and I'm missing lawyers, legal, yes, who will study it and look at the questions that the owner is posed, what their barriers are, their road bumps, and study the information material that's in the Dropbox, and then come armed with their ideas when we meet with the business owner. And it's gone extremely well. So we've already had 2, and I think we're kicking off 2 new ones. And so if you know any businesses in the Valley that would like to get about we figured $10,000 worth of advice for just a few shekels, we'd love to have them apply for their Arizona Business Council. Thank you all for coming. I hope you felt it was worthwhile.